Thank you.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Gary. Okay, that was a little much, but I'll take it. Okay, well, this is definitely an honor to be asked to come up here and present this information. This is something that I knew a little bit about when I first started doing my research almost 30 years ago. But when I started working on this book, I learned so much more about the history of lima beans and how it just totally affected so many different families over the years. Oh, you think it's this thing?
The speaker right above you.
Yeah.
Oh.
No, it's the handheld. Yeah, it's a handheld.
Okay.
Let's move the podium. It might be loud enough if you just keep it in there. Yeah, there's a speaker right behind you.
Oh, okay.
There we go.
Testing. A little better? Okay. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and start with this first slide here, because before lima beans, there were other crops and other ways that people made a living in Ventura County. And as you know, it was part of Santa Barbara County up until 1873.
If you could just put it here, it's not.
Okay.
They'll pick it up.
Yeah, but it's a crutch. Test. Okay, I'll do it that way. So I'm actually working on another book right now, and it's on the history of some of the early grapevines, and it relates to the farm park that I'm involved with right now because they grew grapevines there. And so I've added some of that information to the beginning of this. It kind of fits in as a prelude to the lima beans. So the mission grapes were from Spain, and they were grown at San Buenaventura, about a mile inland from the mission, and it was only one of 6 of the 21 missions that did grow grapes because of the favorable climate and soil. This next slide shows a breakdown of the county, and so you can see that the mission is listed on there, and again, about a mile inland is where they had the first grapevines, and they also had some over towards Fillmore and Piru. Later on towards Cumulos, that was another area. But believe it or not, the main area that they grew grapevines were along the Santa Clara River on the Rancho Santa Clara del Norte. And there's a street over there that commemorates all the vineyards that were there, as we know it as Vineyard today. So that was originally the property of Juan Maria Sanchez, and he actually petitioned for that land in 1837 and lived there through the 60s. His children ended up getting 40 to 50 acres each, and they also planted vineyards. So when he passed away, the family continued growing grapes. Let's see here. His original grant was for 13,000 acres, but in 1864, Sanchez sold the majority of his property with his children retaining their acreage. Several of the descendants married prominent people, and you'll recognize a lot of their names. This is a really rare picture. It's of the Dominguez Mansion, they called it. And they used that later on as a place for people to vote, either in the El Rio del Norte section, also called New Jerusalem, the north area of Colonia. They would go there to the Sanchez place to place their vote. And he grew vines that he planted in 1857. So in 1857, he planted 24 grapevines, 24 acres of grapevines, and at that point, he could produce 2,500 gallons of wine and brandy. He later added some white Muscat grapes and some black Hamburg grapes. He also had a cellar there, about 4 adobe huts, and then his mansion here. And what was interesting is not too far from his property, there was an area called it was called the Crossing, which later on became El Rio, between El Rio and Montalvo. And so there's an area called Brick Kiln Crossing. And that's where they had a brick kiln. It was actually on the river bottom there. And from there, he could get his bricks to go ahead and build his cellar and his building and so forth. And the bricks lasted longer than the adobes. The adobe would actually deteriorate a lot sooner. Let's see, west of the Dominguez property was one ranched by Thomas Williams, who married Susan Sanchez. He had 6,000 vines. Then there was a Pearson vineyard that had 4,500 vines. Angel Escadon married Francisca Sanchez. He planted 50 acres of mission grapes. Pacifico Sanchez also grew grapes. Sinforosa also grew grapes, and she married George Niederver. He was the guy that was a frontier man, fur trapper, and sailor who brought the Santa Barbara lady, the lone woman of Santa Barbara, San Nicolas Island. He's the one that brought her into Santa Barbara. And I guess he got her onto the ship by offering her a bottle of wine. So anyways, let's see what do you have here next. That is Angel Escadon. He was actually the second mayor of Ventura. In 1869, he helped start the process of separating Santa Barbara and Ventura County. And he married one of the Sanchez daughters, and he also grew grapevines there on the Del Norte. This is a really rare old picture. I was going through some pictures. My great aunt, her name was Florence Maulhardt, but her maiden name was Obiels. And her family goes back to the Rodriguez family, which is San Miguelito. So I have all these old photo albums, and this picture was in there, and I matched it up with some other ones online. So that's an original small cabinet card of Escadon. So I'm telling my wife that because she likes to know how much stuff is worth so she can sell it after I'm gone. Right, Deb? This is another picture of early pioneers. Let's see here. This is actually Juan Camarillo's daughter, and I think I went too far on that. I really worked on this a lot. Oh, maybe I turned it too soon. Oh yeah, I didn't turn it over, that's a problem. Okay, so yeah, this is Joseph Wolfson. He had 100 acres on Callegas Rancho, and he married Arcadia Camarillo. So he also grew grapevines. Other people who grew grapevines in the area, Francisco Vasquez, George Faulkner. You guys heard of the Faulkner house over there in Ventura? He actually started on the Del Norte Rancho, and then he moved over towards Ventura. But he grew grapevines. Another guy named D.W. Pierpont Inn, he had 30 acres of mission grapes. So all these people were growing grapevines here in the 1860s and early 1870s. So this is somebody you might recognize if anyone has done some early history reading. This is Antonio. Actually, this is Ignacio de Valle. He's the son of Antonio, and he's the one that inherited Rancho Camulos, and they had 48,000 acres originally. He inherited about 13,000 acres. He planted 90 acres of grapes in the 1860s. See how important grapes were? De Valle built a brick winery building in 1867, and he raised 45 tons of mission grapes, 6,000 gallons of wine, and 800 gallons of brandy. So brandy and wine were the big crops of the day. That's a picture of his winery that's still there to this day. This is actually the winery building over at the farm park. This was built by Godfrey Maulhardt. Again, I mentioned that place, the Brick Kiln Crossing. To me, that's such an important part of history because not much is written about it, but it was so influential to the early grape growers. And Godfrey Maulhardt came here in 1867 with Christian Borchard, and there was no lumberyard in Ventura or Hueneme in 1869 when he was leasing land from Juan Camarillo. But he was a brick mason in Germany. And as a brick mason, he could use that skill to build himself a residence on top and a storage area on the bottom. So this became an area where he stored wine that later on was used for the Santa Clara Chapel. And he probably gathered the grapes from some of the other people on the Oxnard Plain that grew grapevines, and I have a list of those people here. In addition to Godfrey, who had 250 grapevines, his brother Jacob had 1 acre of vines. A guy named Henry Flint had 300 acres. Daniel Gilger, he had grapevines. Ed Borchard had 120 grapevines. James Saviors grew a half an acre of 500 grapevines. John Saviors had a half an acre. Jack Hill had a half an acre. Gotthold Kaltmeyer had a half an acre. And also, Lewis Filer had grapevines on his property too. So these guys all grew grapevines in addition to the other crops they're learning how to grow. This is actually the crops from Santa Cruz Island that were originally from France, and they were planted in 1884. I was fortunate to get some cuttings from here that I have at the farm park in Oxnard. And I was always told they were a Zinfandel Blanc, but they always came out red. So I couldn't figure it out. And I came across something last week where it said they were planted Zinfandel Bronc, or Bronc. So the person told me L instead of B. So we know that what it is now. Something that was happening at that time was the breaking up of the ranchos. In 1862, a guy named George Briggs purchased part of Santa Paula and Satacoy Rancho, and he's the guy in the middle and the top. And his idea in 1862 was to grow some fruit trees here in our area and then ship the fruit because he thought that they would go ahead and ripen before the Northern California crops, and therefore he could, access that market and make a lot more money. He was already making money in Marysville by selling his fruit there, but after about 2 years or so, he gave up for a couple reasons. One, the fruit did not ripen as fast as he thought, and two, he was losing all of his plants to the gophers. The gophers were winning. So the gophers are one of the first crops in the area. So, okay. At the same time in 1867 that Briggs had sold his property over to a guy named Higgins, and he was starting to subdivide Rancho Santa Paula, Christian Borchard came to the area, and he purchased 1,000 acres from Jose Libero. You guys have heard of Libero Theater in Santa Barbara? Well, that's who he bought his property from. Libero bought it from Rafael Gonzalez. Gonzalez was one of 8 grantees of Rancho Colonia. And Libero actually had a pool hall and a bar in Santa Barbara, and that's might have where he met Rafael Gonzalez. I'm not sure that's how he purchased the property from him, but soon after that, Libero never came to this area. He sold it to Christian Borchard, who eventually planted some barley. But first, what he did, check this out. This was written in about 1867. So the area was covered in wild mustard plant. The rancho was so thickly covered with wild mustard that 2 men in 2.5 months gathered with an old-fashioned header 25 tons of mustard seed, which sold for 2 cents per pound. So in other words, that wild mustard plant that we kind of see in the area every now and then, that was really prevalent all throughout Ventura County at that time, and he's able to harvest that as a crop without having to plant it, and he used that money to go ahead and invest in other things. So in fact, by 1870, he harvested 265 tons of mustard. So that's a lot. That's a picture of some wild mustard plant that I took not too long ago, but that's what he saw. That's what all the farmers saw when they came here. And you can read any of the old biographies of the early families he talked about. They came here and they saw this wild mustard plant, so they knew that this was good farming conditions. The soil was good. This was over on the Patterson Ranch, which was about 6,000 acres. And so for about the first 20 years, the top 3 crops in the area were barley, corn, and wheat. So in 1879, they actually harvested in the whole county 39,000 acres of barley, 16,000 in corn, 10,000 in wheat, and only about 1,700 in beans, but that would change soon. This shows a breakdown of Rancho Colonia, and you can see there's a line in the middle here that breaks it up. Sometimes there was a confusion on who owned what land. When Thomas Scott purchased the property that became El Rio de Santa Clara o La Colonia, it was said to be 44,000 acres. So in the upper corner on the right is where like McGrath Lake is, up through the 101 freeway to Camarillo, all the way down to Magoo, come back around to Hueneme, back up to McGrath. That was 44,000 acres. But some people interpreted as the line going from Camarillo instead of to Magoo to Hueneme because they're both lagoons. So they try to argue that 17,000 on the right side was available to the public, so people started squatting the area, 160 acres, as the government allowed for property that wasn't already taken. And so there was a fight, and there was no one that could really buy that land from 1869 to 1872, so the development of the area was slow because of that reason there. Also, again, there wasn't a lumber yard for a lot of years. And I came across a couple of paragraphs in the early newspapers that describe this area. Let's see here. Here's one from 1868. This is a Daily Alta California. So sometimes they'll send a reporter down to the area just to go ahead and write about what was going on in other areas of California. So this reporter says, the route all the way over the Colonia 11 League Grant, nearly the whole of which is unbroken level, so flat. No spring for running water throughout the day's drive, nor any trees or until the vicinity of the Santa Clara. They're talking about the river, where there was a considerable body of willow, cottonwood, and some sycamore growing. Here's another article. This is from 1870, where the Sacramento Daily Union wrote, every conceivable material that one could imagine was appropriated for the erection of their inhabitations. Some who were fortunate obtained boards, which at that time soon gave out. Others dealt in tents, and a number have constructed their domiciles of poles and mustard stock. So people were living in tents for a lot of years. So, okay. Okay, one more. This one, 1870. Oh, it's a description of a dwelling house. A dwelling house, for census purposes, could be a house, of course. It could be a room in a house, a store, a loft, a boat, a tent, a freight car, and most likely a tent. That's 1870. Okay, so by 1871, the area of Ventura County was only about 800 people. That's kind of showing a picture of what it might have looked like back in those days. Flat, no trees, no water. How are you going to farm that? Here's a guy that came to Santa Paula and saw the future of that area. And this is Mr. Blanchard, and he went by the name of Nathan Blanchard. And he purchased 2,700 acres. He raised sheep and alfalfa. And by 1874, he planted the first oranges in the area. So now we're starting to see other things come about. 20 years later, he had partnered with Wallace Hardison, Charles Teague, and Charles McKevitt, and they'll form Limonera, which is around today. But before there was citrus and after barley, there was lima beans. And this is a picture of Henry Lewis, who had 3 sons. But Henry Lewis was from Carpinteria. And the story goes is that there was a guy named Robert McAllister who got some beans from a ship that was off the shore of Carpinteria. and he ate the beans. He liked them so much, he asked for some more. He got like a handful of beans from the chef, and he threw them on his hillside in Carpinteria. He kind of forgot about them. And then they came up and did really well. So he decided he'd go ahead and share the beans with the other farmers, including Henry Lewis. Well, Henry Lewis decided to do some other experiments, and he would plant them in different areas and keep the good beans and then replant those, get his sons involved, and he helped start the development of lima beans in the Carpinteria area. This is Henry Fish. Henry Fish was another guy that was experimenting with lima beans. He came up with one that was more of a bush bean. So instead of like the vines that a lot of the beans were at that time, and still are, these were more of a bush variety that actually grew a shorter amount of time, and they were so popular that back east, there was a guy that really liked them. His name was Atlee Burpee, and he bought them from him, and he named these seeds after his farm in Pennsylvania, and the farm is called Fort Hook. So those became the Fort Hook lima beans. Here's a picture of an advertisement from 1906 for the Fort Hook lima bean. Whoops. That's a picture over there in Pennsylvania of the Fort Hook farm. He used to experiment with all different types of crops, and he would sell the seed. His big industry was seeds. This is a picture of the Dixie Thompson Ranch, which is above the Santa Clara River, kind of by the Ventura Harbor area, above the Olivas property. And he had about 2,000 acres or so, 1,200 acres eventually in lima beans. And he had a guy who was working for him that planted the first crop back in 1871 or so. And so little by little, people started hearing about these and starting to grow them in other parts. One reason Carpinteria didn't grow as many is because they had less land in Ventura County. So some of those farmers eventually just located over here. This is a picture of a guy named Jefferson Crane. 1874, he was in Santa Paula. He planted a couple hundred acres. He actually sent the beans to his father in Ohio, who sent them to the eastern markets to try to get people to start buying the beans. It was a slow process, but he gets credit for getting the beans over there to the East Coast. Another person, too, who did that was a guy named Achille Levy. This is a picture of them sending lima beans from here in Ventura County over to the East Coast. And he had 12 cartloads originally, and he had a big display on his train that said they were from Ventura County. Skipping back just a little bit. Whoops, going the wrong direction. This is another picture of the Dixie Thompson Ranch. Again, it became the biggest lima bean growing area in all the United States. So no other single farmer grew as many lima beans as he did, which was 1,200 acres at one time. Until Adolfo Camarillo teamed up with Joseph Lewis, one of three sons of Henry Lewis. And Joseph Lewis came here in 1889. Eventually, by 1901, he formed a partnership. Then he bought 8,000 acres where the kind of university is at this point, and they became the biggest lima bean producers in the area. And 1893 was a big year for a lot of people, for a lot of industries. Ventura County jumped at the idea of sending their crops to the World Fair. They actually had a special train leaving this area to go to Chicago, and over 250 people went on that train. And when they got there, they had this big pagoda right there in the middle, and it was made out of lima beans. And it had lima beans written on it in different colors. And it was interesting. We went to Chicago last year, my wife and I, to meet up with my daughter and granddaughter, and son-in-law, who happened to be there, and we went on the little architectural tour, and the lady was talking about the World's Fair and all that, and she goes, when you're done, if you have any questions, please let me know if I missed anything or if anything bothered you. So we're leaving. I say, yeah, you missed something and something bothered me. She goes, what's that? I said, you didn't mention how Ventura County introduced lima beans to the world in 1893. So she laughed also, and she said she'll put it in her speech. So next time I go there, I'll see if she does. So that was at the World Fair. Now, by 1890s, it became the biggest crop in the area. And this is Albert Maulhardt. He was the secretary of the Lima Bean Association in 1896. He was already approached by the people in Chino about possibly growing sugar beets in the area. So he took it upon himself, was actually hired by the people in Chino to do experiments on growing sugar beets. So he had 100 plots throughout the area in 1896, about a half an acre to 5 acres each, and to see how the sugar beet would respond to the soil in Ventura County. In the Oxnard Plain, there's a lot of alkaline soil, and so that didn't do well with barley, but with the with the sugar beets, it did really well. The sugar beets did well in that type of soil. And also, by bringing in sugar beets to the area, it kind of cut down on the production of lima beans enough to the point where people growing lima beans could make money again. Because the price of lima beans had really gone down from 1890 to 1895 to half the price of what they were getting. By introducing these sugar beets, now the prices could go back up. So this guy was doing that. He was 25. That's actually the article from 1897. After all those experiments, 2 years of experiments, the Oxnard brothers committed to build a sugar factory, which would cost $2 million at that time, which would be about $50 million in today's money. But it wasn't just the Oxnard. They actually had investors over there in the East Coast that helped finance actually the majority of it. This is actually a picture in February 1898 when the factory was being built on the Oxnard Plain, and so many people were excited about this. They had a big barbecue, and they had hundreds of people come to check out the beginning of the sugar factory and have games, and you could see all the horse and carriages and not any cars yet. And then by the end of 1899, they had their first production. And this is a picture of, at one time, the largest sugar factory in the world. But Klaus Spreckels, who was also trying to get the farmers to grow sugar beets for him and lost out to the Oxnard, built a sugar factory in the Watsonville area and made it just a little bit bigger so he could claim it. And from there, they had to build a downtown, so they purchased an area downtown. The Oxnards actually bought some property from the Hill family, and they started by 1902. They were trying to make it into a city. They're carving out what they thought might be the borders. They went back and forth. By 1903, it became a city. So what we have here is some pictures. I'm going to do like a group of pictures of lima beans over the years. So we'll go by a little bit faster, but this is in Santa Paula. And that's one thing that really impressed me is that everybody grew lima beans. Santa Paula, Montalvo, Oxnard, Ventura, Camarillo. That's the Patterson Ranch, around 1900. And you can see the stacks of lima beans. You can see the steam engine on the left. And usually had a crew of about 30 to 50, and usually they would start harvesting in September, sometimes October, and men would come into the area at that time just to work on these for about a 2-week period at a time. And what they would do, they would choose the crew that had the best chef. Whoever had the best chef is who they would work for because, you know, they knew that that'd be their big payoff right there. This is a steam tractor pulling a thresher, 15 bean wagons, pre-1900. Look at the background. Don't see any buildings. Where's the asphalt? This is over here taking a little break in a little tent because they'd go out there for 2 weeks and they'd work, 12-hour shifts. This is actually in Carpinteria, the Pate family, who I've met recently, and they were growing lima beans by the 1920s in Carpinteria. I'm sorry, in Lompoc. This is George Washington Faulkner, 1880s. Patrick and George Flynn over in Camarillo. Those are 100-pound bags. That's why, like a lot of the early Oxnard High School baseball and football teams are very successful because they had stronger young men, working for them. My grandfather went to Oxnard High, graduated in 1928. He was 6'4", and he got a full ride scholarship to UCLA. And I asked him, I said, "Why do you think you got that?" He goes, "Picking up bags of lima beans." Enoch Waters, that's his crew. This is a Camarillo crew of men. Again, they came from other areas. Some people definitely were from the area that stuck around and so forth, but these guys would go and find wherever they're harvesting. This was an important ranch, a Still Ranch. Oh, I have that information here. I don't. In the 20s, I remember they set a record for the most number of bags produced in one day. I can't remember the number, but it's in the book right over there. I still have 11 to sell. The Munger brothers out of Santa Paula, they also grew lima beans for several years. The Solari Ranch in the Del Norte area. Del Norte was kind of like a big cactus patch for a lot of years. And it was used for grazing a little bit at one point, but the majority of it was not farmed in any way. They cleared off the cactus. They used the moisture in the air, and you guys have heard that story before. Whenever it was foggy, what did our parents tell us? It was lima bean weather, because the fog would come onto the leaves, fall down, and that was the moisture you needed. The other story I'll tell you about how much to give water to lima beans. I planted some in 2000. I have an acre and a half in Camarillo, so I thought, I'm going to put a little patch of lima beans. So I went to Emil Filer. I said, "Mr. Filer, do you have some old lima beans so I can plant for my house?" He goes, "Oh, sure." So he gave me a bunch, and I planted them all happy, and I took my before pictures and stuff, and then I called him up. "Okay, Mr. Filer, how often should I water these?" He goes, "Maybe 2 or 3 times." I go, "A week?" He goes, "No, for the summer." And he never yelled. So the point is, you didn't need a lot of water for lima beans. This is my great-grandfather, Louis Maulhardt off Rice Road, and his crew. I actually have this picture over at Adolfo Grill above the barn on the left-hand side. This is a doghouse. That's where they would sow the bags of beans. It was next to the thresher, so it would come out on the side, and the guy would sit there and sow it. Next guy would pick it up, put them on an area where they'd stack them, and do that all day. This is the Gill brothers, and they're a big outfit, probably about 50 people there. This is the Edwards Pettit threshing outfit. A lot of times, the different farming families would team up together. And I know the Pettit family also worked with the Borchard family. And this is the Edwards Pettit outfit again. Urbane Underwood. This is actually a picture from the 50s. And what's interesting about this, if you can see at the very bottom on the left, you see it's actually picking up the beans. Instead of threshing them on top, throw them on top and have them go through the machine and go through the cylinders and stuff, this machine actually would pick it up and it'd go through and do the same thing at that point. So that was a turning point in threshing dry lima beans, which is different from the other ones we'll talk about soon. This is the Nauman brothers. This is Filomena Oliveira. She was over towards Hueneme. Her husband died early on in the relationship, so she kept the farming going. And she stayed on that ranch until about 20 years ago. And she was a brother of Joe Silveria. Joe Silveria is one of the many Portuguese farmers who came to this area, and they would work in the fields, but then they would go off to their other jobs or their own ranches after that. But I know my grandfather used to hire a lot of the Portuguese. This is the Diedrich brothers. On the back side, you see that cookhouse. So you'd have a cook in there, and they cooked a lot of steaks, believe it or not, and pies were a big part. Biscuits were another thing that they had a lot of for their meals. It's inside of a, for the Gill Ranch. This is Bob Filer. He's actually planting the lima beans with his two daughters, because his daughters wouldn't have had those kind of hats in those days. And plus, they look pretty happy. If you're planting lima beans all day, then you're not going to be very happy. These are the ladies over in Camarillo. So the beans would come through and they'd pick out the bad ones. These are the guys over in Montalvo. Oh, this is an interesting article I came across. So many people are growing lima beans in the 19-teens. By World War II, they became a substitute for protein. So much so that the government in December of 1917 seized all the beans from the farmers in Ventura County to give to the soldiers. But they paid them, of course, but I'm not sure how much. But that was interesting. They took all the beans. Let me go back to that one. Later on, in World War II, they started using lima beans as a ration. They had 6 rations, and it was the least favorite ration of all the rations. Why? Because they'd put it with a big old salty bone. And it's not fair to the lima bean. Thank you. By 1919, what happened was the Lima Bean Association decided to market their lima beans. Suncus did that with the oranges. Nobody drank orange juice for breakfast before they came up with that idea to sell it. Sunmaid was another one that in the teens came up with a brand to sell their product. Well, that's what Seaside did for lima beans starting in 1919, and they'd advertise in different magazines like McCall's and so forth. And they'd also talk about how you could save money because you could use these protein lima beans as a substitute for meat. And then they started freezing them. That became another reason that lima beans became less favorable to some people, because when you freeze them, of course, you're going to flash freeze them. So you're not going to cook them for very long. So the opportunity to absorb all the flavor is missed. So that's why the dry limas are always more favored, because you can cook them for a longer period of time and give it more flavor. And so that's what I have over here. I have a couple of bags of dried lima beans. Then in the 20s, a guy out of Ojai, Bill Baker, came up with a lima bean bread. And that was like something all the lima bean farmers were excited about. He found a way to go ahead and make flour out of it and make this bread and sell it. The problem was the process was a little too expensive. So even though lima bean bread is out there, lima bean flour is out there, it's not real prominent because it's not real cost effective. Okay, this is in the 30s. By the 1930s, up to this time, lima beans were the #1 crop in the area. So what happened was citrus took over in the 1930s. Lima beans were still big, but citrus was definitely the #1 crop in the area at that time. So that's what this represents, is the 1930s. But people were still growing lima beans. Walnuts became another big crop, and those are walnuts on the outside, and they grow the lima beans in the middle. So that's kind of what happened to a lot of Santa Paula. That's why they stopped growing lima beans. They actually put citrus, and then when the trees were young, they'd plant the beans still, and by the time the trees got big, then they just abandoned the lima beans. By the 1960s, strawberries started being introduced to the area. This is actually my Uncle Dick Maulhardt and Henry Watanabe over here on the left. So he leased the land to Henry. A couple years later, me and my brothers got a summer job out there planting lima beans. And that encouraged me to go to college. Thanks a lot. This is actually a picture of a lima bean thresher that was built in Ventura Manufacturing and Implement Company. And I took this picture over in Costa Mesa, because in Costa Mesa, they still have a 40-acre ranch, and this belonged to the Callens family. So what happened was a guy named James Irvine from the Irvine area came down this area because he wanted to introduce lima beans to his farmers. He was leasing land to his farmers, but they weren't being very successful with lima beans. This is about the turn of the century. And so he encouraged a lot of the farmers to come there. So the Borchards went over there, the Callens, the Geisers went there, Krukenberg, a few others went there, brought their equipment and introduced those farmers to lima beans, and they almost caught us as far as lima bean capital of the world up until World War II. But that's still over there in Costa Mesa. That's what I was talking about. That's the ration for the lima beans. And they had a nickname for it, the Mother Effers, and I won't say what it is. This is interesting. This is a 45. Eddie Ware did this song. And I'm saying it could be the first rock and roll record in the history of rock and roll. Why? Because there's a song called Rocket 88 that was recorded in March of 1951 that has the same bass line, the same rhythm, the same amplified guitar lick. And that's considered the first rock and roll record. 2 months before that, a song the same sound called Lima Beans was done by Eddie Ware, but it wasn't released at the same time, so therefore it doesn't get credit as being the first rock and roll song. So I'm going to do my best to see if I can get that in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. These are the directors for the Lima Bean Association. You can see Adolfo Camarillo in the middle there. He's on his knees. He's like the short one. And then in the 40s, something else happened. They started growing Fort lima beans here because they could go ahead and harvest them faster. They grew in a shorter amount of time. And they would have these new machines called viners where the beans would go up there into a bin. They'd put ice on them, get them over to one of the new factories they had built here, like Oxnard Frozen Foods, and then they could package them right away. That's in a field, a viner with the beans going up. And then they put ice on it to keep it from getting cold. You know, dry lima beans, they cut them. And then after that, for about 2 weeks, they're out there in the field, drying up before they go through the machine so they can go ahead and break the pod and so forth. With these, it's automatic. These are LV harvesters. So they go behind a tractor and they would pick up the cut beans. The beans were cut. Within an hour, they'd come through and harvest those, get them flash frozen, and sold in the market right away. So that's again, these are for the Ford hooks. Another example of the next generation of machine they use to cut the Ford hook bush lima beans. This is the FMC 125 harvester. These are the guys from the Oxnard Frozen Foods, local farmers. John Dollum on the left, sitting down. He was the president, and these guys used the farmers in the area to form a co-op, where that way they can protect the price of the beans and make some money. This was very popular from 60 up until about the late 80s. That's Oxnard Frozen Foods. I got a chance to work there in 75 during the strike. And Ed Laubacher was a manager, and he called my grandpa and he said, I need your grandkids to go and help out at the frozen foods. And my grandpa said, why? We're having a strike, so all the workers aren't working. So Ed called all the local farmers for their kids and grandkids. They talked to the guys at Santa Clara High School, Wainimi and Oxnard, and we all went there, and they were striking right there. Well, we're all 6'3", 6'4". We're walking in, and they just parted the ways. We went in and we worked for 2 weeks. And the strike was over. So we're going to give ourselves credit. This is the Pleasant Valley Lima Bean Growers Association. Picture taken by Frank Nauman back in the 90s. 1948, it was built. It became the biggest lima bean warehouse in the world. I think it's 48,000 square feet. That's another picture that he took of the Pleasant Valley Lima Bean Growing Association. This is a picture I took recently. It's the Oxnard Pallet Company. The owners of the place allowed me to go in and take a view of the whole place. It's incredible how big it is, and you can see a lot of the old equipment is still there. It'd be a great field trip for anybody to check that place out. So now the beans aren't harvested here. Oxnard Frozen Foods closed down in '89. By the 90s, the warehouse had closed down. So now all the beans go to King City. This is L.A. Hearn Company in King City. Larry and his wife Irene actually opened a company in 1938. His grandchildren actually run the company today. So what they do, they provide the beans for the local farmers, and then they pick them up, they clean the beans, and then they go ahead and sell the beans. This is 2,000 pounds each. Each tote is 2,000 pounds. Those are all going to England. England loves lima beans, and so does Italy. This is actually seed from Mike Nauman's ranch. These are seed from 2 years ago that were brought into his ranch from Hearn. And then this is an example of the bean thrashers kind of leaving the area. This one left Faria Beach, is now at the farm park. This is a picture of a local guy, Larry Nunez, with his GE Price. GE Price is a company who's out of Orange County. Art Thomas did a lot of bean thrashing here in the Oxnard Plain, and then he took his children up to Oregon to keep threshing beans, except he couldn't do it in the wintertime. But that's his bean thrasher. This is Bill Lennox, who passed away recently. He knew a lot about the industry. He was a very big help for me, and that's him on his Ventura manufacturing implement. This is Debershire's bean thrasher, picture taken by Frank Nauman. David Aguilera, who's working for Bill Lennox, that's on his machine over there by Camarillo Springs. So that's just Derbyshire in 1990s. And this was 2 years ago. That's Connor Ryman, who's 6th generation farming family and from a bunch of different families. But they are still growing lima beans and harvesting them on the Oxnard Plain, Camarillo area. This is Mike Nauman and his crew. That's from about 2 years ago. I took that picture. That you can see Camarillo in the background. People always ask me, do they still grow lima beans? Yeah. This is 2024. There's James and Connor. There's about 4 guys still doing it. Not a whole lot of acreage, maybe 2,000 at the most. But it's fun for me. I go out there, I take pictures, I get in their way. There's always these beautiful backgrounds that we still have in the area. That's actually one that the Rymans got from Shane Donlan. Shane Donlan grew up in this area from the Donlan family. He went over to San Joaquin Valley area. He passed away, then his son sold that back over to his cousin. So the Rymans have that back in Ventura County. That's me trying to get in the act, showing where the lima beans are off of, that was off of Las Posas, pointing towards the university. Mike Nauman again, coming up the row. That's Mike and his son Joe talking about the Dodgers. That thing on the left there is a bin. And so they'd go into the machine, and the machine actually had a lever on it that would bring it up, dump it in that bin. That bin would be taken over to one of these, dropped in, and then Hearn Company will pick them up, clean them. Then those guys get paid. That's Round Mountain in the background. It's my favorite backgrounds. Of course, I like the poles there too. This is actually last year I took this off of Laguna, and his Pick Suite is doing the growing. These are Ford hooks again, and they use what they call an oxbow machine, kind of like those earlier machines we saw, the LVs. This is the new version of it. On the left is where they cut it, and on the right it hasn't been cut. After it's cut, this guy's cutting it here on the right. Then this guy gets ready with his bin. This guy in his oxbow, and it says there, eat more Ford Hook lima beans. This is a Segerson Ranch over in Costa Mesa. I got to meet these people. They still have 40 acres. These people, they started growing lima beans in the 1920s and 30s. By the 50s, they were like the biggest lima bean growers in the United States. And then they started selling their land, and the South Coast plazas there, that's their property. And but they kept 40 acres because it's still in their blood. They wanted to still grow lima beans. They may not even make that much money, but they're very nice, generous people. I've been there several times, and you can see the IKEA building in the background. I took that. I went back when they're harvesting. There's IKEA again. This is over in Lompoc. I went there a couple times this fall. That's a Pate Ranch. That's over at the Oxnard Historic Farm Park. I have Mike Nauman come out there every spring, give us a lesson on lima beans. Then we grow our own. And then some of the same master gardeners of Ventura County, they take their beans to their house and grow them at their place. These are some bags, our first round of bags that we planted. So we buy the 50-pound bags from Hearn. They're the beans that are grown in Ventura County. We bag them into 2-pound bags. We sell them for $10, and we make $5 for the farm park. We had our Lima Bean Fest last year. Paul Debushier brought in one of his newer bean thrashers from the 1950s. Ours are from 1903. That was our poster I had made up for the event. Collectors on them. I have a couple more left at the farm park. We had actually 5 restaurants come out and do a lima bean dish. And the problem with lima beans is people grew up with the canned or the frozen, so they don't like lima beans. They didn't get the good flavored lima beans. So what's happened is, like for example, my master gardeners, there's a couple people that swore that they hated lima beans. I said, just do me one favor. Take a bag. My wife Debbie came up with a lima bean trinity. Follow the recipe and tell me what you think. Both of them came back. I'm converted. I love lima beans. Now they buy them every other week because, again, it can take on the flavor of it and so forth. So anyways, these guys got some beans from me, and they made a lima bean chili. It was really good. And this is BG's Cafe, and that's the original Gloria right there from BG's Cafe. Twisted Oak Tavern, that's Jeff Walker. His chef actually came up with a recipe I used in the book, and it's from the 40 Leaguers from 1939. He used that barbecued lima beans, and I had everybody vote on the 5 different ones. They got 3 beans, and they got the most beans, and they won. They got a trophy. And that's the chef. Then we made the Tri-Century magazine newspaper. That's my daughter Brooke. She did lima bean crafts where the kids got to draw them, label them, glue in lima beans. My grandson and other people came up and did lima bean facts every hour. That day, we sold 100 bags of beans and 60 books. So it was our best fundraiser ever. We used to do an Oktoberfest, no more. Oktoberfest, you can't make money. The band costs too much, the food costs too much, it takes too much time and effort, and they break even? No thanks. That's actually the cover for the next book. I had so much information from this last book that I thought, well, you know what, I need to do a follow-up. So I talked to the publisher. He said, sure, you can do another book, but you have to cover Central and Southern California and the lima bean history, including Ventura County. So I did that. But what I found out is no matter what, even including them, Ventura County still has way more history. And so, I was able to go ahead and include that in there, and that will be out this summer and available for the second Lima Bean Fest. So anyway, that concludes my slideshow. Hopefully it didn't take too long. I can take a couple questions if they're easy ones. Otherwise, I do have a couple books there and some beans. Any questions? Yes, ma'am.
I don't know if this is a little trivia or whatever, but you had a picture of Wolfson
Yeah.
and Camarillo.
Yes.
They got married
Yeah.
It's funny because we've been to an infectious disease doctor in Camarillo named Wolfson,
Oh,
and it's not a real common name.
yeah.
It's not Wilson, it's Wolfson.
Yeah.
And it's funny because his office is right around the block from the Camarillo Ranch.
I don't know. Do you know Gary? I haven't heard. I mean, it makes me want to look into it.
Yeah.
I know the Camarillo name kind of died out itself because Adolfo only had one son, Frank, who didn't have any children, but the daughters had several kids over the years.
I may call the nurse and see.
Yeah, that'd be interesting, but I'll definitely be looking into it myself too. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
What happened to all the grapes?
Well, you know, grapes are susceptible to fog, moisture, and so forth. And so with time, disease will get to them. And so some areas, I'm sure, it could withstand it a little bit better than other areas. But I know at the farm park in Oxnard, every year we're fighting some kind of mildew. Yes, ma'am?
So are all those crops that you discussed dry farming?
Yes, ma'am. Very good. And that was a very important point because when these first farmers came into the area, there wasn't really any irrigation system set up. So when you plant barley, you just have to come in after the rains, plant your barley with the moisture and stuff, you have enough to go ahead and produce a crop. That's why lima beans were a good second crop to come on in. By the time you got to sugar beets, you better have yourself some water source. So they had more technology at the time to drill wells and bring water in, or maybe do a canal from the river, that type of thing. But yes, that's a very good point. Those are examples of dry farming.
One other comment. No, it looks like lima beans doesn't take very much manpower these days, does it? All I saw was a couple of people on machines.
Yeah, you're right. One guy to plant them, maybe two guys to harvest them, depending on how much you have. Mike Nauman has he has about 5 bean thrashers, but he uses 3 at a time. And there's 2 guys, one guy driving and one guy kind of like, maneuvering, checking it out, maybe fixing something, unclogging something, whatever. But yeah, so the overhead is low, water low, but you just don't make as much money as you would for strawberries. So if you have the money to invest in strawberries, although they're grown at different times. So the lima beans grown in this area are actually following celery a lot of times, and the celery does well because the lima beans actually put nitrogen back in the soil, so they complement each other. Yes?
So I'm from the Camarillo Ranch.
Oh, that's right.
I bought the books.
Uh-huh.
Would you sign my books today for the board?
Yeah,
Okay, great.
no extra charge. Any other questions? Yes.
I had one. You mentioned the beet and showed, the beet factory that was built in Oxnard, that's now the Oxnard Pallet Company. But were those sort of neck and neck? Were the beets being produced at the same time as the lima beans?
Yeah, but they actually complement each other. And you could actually, a lot of times when people had 100 acres, they might do 50 in lima beans and 50 in sugar beets. But the sugar beets took a lot out of the soil, the deep roots and so forth. So you'd alternate your crops. So the beans would be planted here, and now it's helping. So they were more complementary than they were competitive, and but they were grown at the same time.
Do you have any idea what the Brits are using the lima beans for? The ones that are being shipped out?
What are they used for?
Yeah. Are they just putting them in soups or?
Yeah, in most cases, it's soup. I talked to the guy over in King City, Francis Giudici is his name, and I asked him about that. And they're as surprised as we are that they'd like them over there. But another thing he said, they probably got introduced to them during the World Wars, especially during World War I, when we're sending our beans over to our soldiers and they're getting some of them and so forth. So, and it's a very hearty meal. Do you eat lima beans at all?
No.
Okay. You're like most people.
I'm wondering.
Well, here's the thing about lima beans. I love lima beans, and I was fortunate because I grew up eating more of the dry lima beans. And for me, they fill me up, but I don't feel bloated, and I have good energy afterwards. I have information on the nutritional value of it in the book there, and they call it the new superfood because it has a lot of protein. It has a good stuff for regulating your blood. It has other minerals and stuff that are good for you. So it's good for people with diabetes. So they actually tried to use it in the 20s as a way of helping people with diabetes. That was the main reason they tried to came up with the flour. But don't quote me on that one.
And another fun fact,
Mm-hmm.
aren't they called butter beans in the South?
That's right. Yeah, people kind of think like, you know, in fact, the people, it's funny, the people in Lompoc, they're sensitive to the fact that lima beans kind of has a bad reputation for a lot of people because people grew up with the canned and the frozen. And so when they sell theirs, they call them butter beans. They think that, you know, they're beating the market by doing that. I'm not, I'm going after it. We're lima beans.
Jeff, where does Lima come from?
Lima, Peru. There was a port there, but actually they came from other parts of South America, but that was the main port, Lima, Peru. That ship came from Lima at that time in 1868.
So are these largely an American, mostly California product, or do they have large areas around the world?
Well, they do grow lima beans in other parts of the United States, but they don't grow dry lima beans. Believe it or not, those are the vine kind, the kind you saw the later pictures of and so forth. Those can only be grown here because of our climate and our soil. Over in New Jersey and some parts in the east and so forth, even Minnesota, they grow lima beans, but they grow the bush kind. And it's a shorter growing season for them, and then they usually can those or freeze those. So.
I grew up within eyesight of the orchard property between Doris and Teal Club.
Sure.
And remember when they would grow lima beans year after year after year on that piece of property, and I would see the big trains of threshers
Yeah.
come and harvest. I assume that there was just basically one outfit that would go from farm to farm to farm, and they would
They'd have a couple different ones for sure. You know, like you know, you might, if you didn't have a way to harvest your own, you might hire, you know, one of the farmers that had it, you know, and that might be your guy that you went to all the time. But as you saw, a lot of times they would double up on the families and use that. But yeah, they would go from different things. And also depending on where you live. The closer to the ocean, the later that you would harvest yours. In fact, the McGrath property was always like the last property that you would harvest because they're closer to the moisture and it didn't dry out as fast.
Those things would go all night long.
Yeah.
I could hear them when I was in bed.
That's
And,
right.
I was a few blocks away.
Yeah.
But I hadn't seen that operation going
I got
on for
goosebumps.
so long.
No, I've heard that from other people too, where like they said they remember seeing it at nighttime too.
Yeah,
You know?
it's just so great to see. And I was wondering, and you answered the question in your talk, whether there was anybody still growing lima beans in
Yeah.
the Oxnard Plain. But it doesn't look like they have that same number of machines.
They didn't need it because those pictures you saw early on with the big crews, that's when they had to go ahead and cut them first and then pile them and then put them on top of the machine. Then it would go through the machine, through the cylinders, and spit everything out and so forth. So it was, and then they would take the leftover and they would put that for the livestock. So they used everything about
I'd
it.
like to see that there's still some acreage on the Oxnard Plain that's growing lima.
Well, you know, my wife will tell you that sometimes I'm going to take off. Where are you going? It's sunset. I want to get some pictures of them threshing the beans. Sometimes I'll just drive around and see if anyone's doing it at the time, you know. Like I know Mike Nauman was threshing over there by the, in Wainimi by the power plant. But the afternoon is terrible because the sun is right there, so it's a bad picture. So I asked him, and he staged his machine right where he was doing it. So I got there in the morning with the sun behind me. I got these great pictures of the machine and also the other stuff behind it that looked really good. So yeah, you live and learn different ways to find the best pictures. And I have hundreds of them now. But I enjoy it. Anything else? All right, thank you.
You want me to? Okay, I'll take it. this excellent presentation today, and thank you to all of our attendees. As a reminder, today's session was recorded and will be posted to our website at vclandmarks.org, vclandmarks.org.